Hi, hey, hello. Welcome to episode 13 of Trail Society, brought to you again this week by our friends over at Strava. I am Corinne Malcolm.
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
We are so happy once again to have Strava on board for this mini series that we're doing, these 5 episodes, and they're really helping us out. And if you don't have a Strava subscription yet, give it a try. We mentioned last time all these features that we like as part of that Strava subscription, including route building, matched efforts, segment leaderboards, and much, much more. And it starts at $5 a month. So that's a cup of coffee. If you can swing it, get on board. It's really, really cool to get to play in that community. Before we got on air live recording, it's been kind of a wild week for all of us. And I'm so happy to be sitting here on a Friday looking at your smiling faces.
Likewise. So
I mean, beanies all around. No, I'm not wearing a beanie, but everyone's at home, I think right now. I'm at home. I'm blurry today, but I had like a super weird health scare over the weekend in which my entire right side of my face was swollen, and I kind of look like I've undergone a chemical peel at this point, which I've been told people pay really good money for. So that's a bonus. But it's I think we've all been fighting our way into 2022 is kind of the vibe I think we're bringing.
Yeah, totally. I had some like Pacific Northwesty weather here in Boulder. It was like freezing rain, and literally I didn't even drive my car anywhere because, and I was like running on the pavement on my way home from my trail run, and I kept my spikes on. It was treacherous. So
it looked sketch.
Yeah.
We don't really get icy rain. So Not sure what you're talking about.
Mud. They get mud.
We get a ton of mud. We get more like warmer rain. It's still cold, but it's not freezing typically. So then it's just, everything's just super, super wet. Which, arguably not fun either, but
Keely lives like 1,000 feet higher than everyone else in Portland. So she gets snow and everyone else gets rain. So she lives in this little, I've gotten to be there, this little angelic world up high on Skyline. And it's really, really cool to wake up to snow up there. I've got to imagine in Portland.
Yeah, it was magical. It snowed like the day after Christmas, like 3 or 4 inches up here. And so I got to do like a proper snow run in Portland before any of my East Coast friends got snow, while Boulder had no snow. So it was just this weird world. I was in this snowy fairyland and nobody else that normally gets snow had gotten snow. So I felt pretty special. But then as soon as I left, it turned to ice. And then all of Forest Park was a skating rink. And so nobody could run. So I think I got the best running day in as well.
We don't have too much trail specific news this week. We're going to have some more trail specific stuff, both from on the race front and also on the contract front, which you guys all really liked last time, kind of talking about what contracts look like for people. And we've got some movement in our community, and we're going to talk about that more next time around. But we had some really cool running results in the road world at the Houston Marathon and Half Marathon this past weekend. And I don't know, Keely, if you want to kick that off, but I was just blown away, and the stories are so cool coming out of it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is such a cool weekend for women's running. So for those of you who don't know what happened at Houston, so we'll start in the marathon. So the women's US marathon record was broken, which had stood since 2006 by Dina Castor. And it was broken by a woman named Kira D'Amato. And I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, so I'll apologize ahead of time if it's wrong. But she is 37 years young, and she had just returned to running after a pretty long hiatus after a really successful collegiate career at American University. But she started running again later in life and has just been crushing it, and is a mom and is a realtor and has a job and had only been running professionally for the last like year and a half, and just absolutely crushed it. And it was so cool to see. If you guys haven't checked her out, I would reach it, like go look at her story, and like the messages she's putting out into the world are just absolutely amazing. I think her tweet immediately after setting the new USA American women's record for the marathon, she said something along the lines of, I keep getting messages from people telling me that they saw me do it and they want to do it. And I'm so excited to see the next person break my record. And she's like so encouraging for female runners, and just like an absolute A+ athlete out there, like representing women.
I have chills just like thinking about that. And I think that her story is one of those stories where, when we've talked about like the Olympic trial standard getting changed, this is who it impacts. It impacts people like Kara who came back into the sport and had this tangible thing to chase and then progressively lit that world on fire. And so, that's something to think about when we talk about these Olympic trials qualifying standards and what that means for exciting women in sport. But so cool to see a 37-year-old mom of two just run sub 220, like so fast.
Insane.
And for a record that was that long standing, like 2006, like that's incredible. She was the women's 10-mile world record holder as well. And that happened, pretty recently as well, after her long hiatus from professional running, at least.
Yeah. I think what's going on right now in the world of women's running with Molly Seidel and Kira and all these people crushing records and getting medals is that we're almost rewriting the training books, right? There's not this one path fits all now. It's not, you must run in high school and college and go directly into professional running and then continue running for your entire life to get these records. Like, there's a lot of different paths we can take to finding our own potential and reaching these new heights in distance running. And I feel like that in itself is super, super exciting.
I think Shalane Flanagan had an Instagram post today or recently this week. And she basically said, like, the thing that's exciting her about this generation of runners is that they all seem to be having a good time. Like, they all seem to be actually enjoying themselves. And Molly Seidel has talked about this, about how it's like, I can have fun and take myself seriously. Like, just because I'm having fun doesn't mean that I don't care or that I'm not working hard and that kind of stuff. So I think it's this really cool dynamic to see all these really cool personalities and styles of training and different paths into the sport or back into the sport, like find a lot of success. And it's just like the women's distance boon and high performance, like piece of that puzzle is like Barry. I mean, we're going to get to talk about this for years and years to come, because I think it's example, right? Like, she's inspiring other women to get out there and do the same thing. So that leads us to the half marathon at Houston as well. That was also insanely fast.
Yeah. And this was Miss Sarah Hall, who we're not strangers to. She's been in the sport for a very long time now. And she got a new U.S. women's half marathon record, running 1:07:15, about 10 seconds faster than the previous record. And she's been a little bit more on that, what you would call a stereotypical running path, I guess, because she's been running forever. She was All-American at Stanford, went professional afterwards, and has been running professionally since the early 2000s, right?
Standout high school runner as well, like a Foot Locker champion type of runner. Like, we've seen Sarah Hall before the three of us were probably running at this point,
Yeah. But the cool thing about her is that she's been open about having times of her career where she's needed to reevaluate her self-worth in running and almost like take a step back and maybe adopt something new in her life that gives her joy as well. And so, like, along this journey, she's done a lot of different things, but one of the bigger things that I thought was awesome, she took time in 2009 and adopted 4 children from Ethiopia, and obviously gave her life a little bit different of a purpose at that time. And just has continually stuck with the training and the journey, and has not accepted that at her age, she shouldn't be able to do these things. Instead, she's like embraced her age and embraced her experience. And it's paying off. She's absolutely crushing it. She just ran a super fast marathon time this past year as well. That was close to that US marathon record. It was the second fastest in women's time. And so she's been on a tear this year as well. And it's really cool to see her and her husband now both hold the half marathon record for Americans. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Obviously Sarah Hall's husband is Ryan Hall, who when he retired, they kind of shifted the focus to her, which I think has been a cool story for them to share about how it's like, okay, it's now Sarah's time. Like, my energy is going into Sarah's running, and their family really supports Sarah's running, and their adopted daughters from Ethiopia, who they adopted siblings, which is really, really cool. Are also now running in the US. They share a lot about their family, and it's a very cool, I don't know. It brings you all the warm, fuzzy feels. Let's put it that way. But I think that Sarah's an athlete that races a lot, races pretty darn well almost all the time, but, didn't make the Olympics this last time around. And so I really, really hope that things come together for her so that she can make an Olympic team this next time around. But I also know that like winning a marathon major would, I think, also check that like I did it list for her. And so I think we're going to see some really cool things out of Sarah Hall in the marathon in the next 4 years.
And something I just wanted to add about Sarah that, I've been following her for a while, and something that just really inspires me is, she's competing at that high of a level. And I think she posted about this publicly, but saying how she didn't want to have any goals that ripped her out of the present moment. And so that her and Ryan, they kind of reshifted things and said that they're going after a feeling, not a specific time. And I think that can be
how trail and ultra.
Yeah, that's what
we convert her. I don't know.
But that's something that I just thought was so cool. And even in our last episode, talking about, this intangible thing and trail and, how do you specify training load? And like, I was talking about rate of perceived effort, going by feel. And, she's obviously doing the work, but it's really cool to see her publicly kind of embracing this non-traditional style of training for these intense, half and road marathons. So.
Yeah, very, very cool. I think the other thing kind of on our list was that, races are kind of getting finalized. People are finalizing their race seasons. Golden Trail stuff that we covered a little bit this past year because we've got some fast friends that throw down at this stuff, this sub ultra distance. They're kind of reverting back to what they did in 2019 pre-pandemic, where they've got their global series in which people compete to make the final. But then they also are going to continue with their national trail series. And so the North American Golden Trail series is officially set, I think, for this upcoming year, with it being Broken Arrow in June, followed by Whistler Alpine Meadow 50K and Quebec Mega Trail, Pikes Peak Ascent, which moved later in September to not conflict with some other stuff going on. And then Flagstaff Sky Peaks 26K will be the finale for the US series. So it's kind of like they're merging with what used to be, I think, like the US North American Skyrunning series in a lot of ways. It's a lot of those races are kind of coming in, but they're still going to do a national series. And then there's going to be the big global series with races like Sierras and All and Zagama that will culminate in a big world kind of finale that all of our speedies like Rachel Drake and Danny Moreno will be throwing down at. Bailey Kowalczyk will be throwing down at for our sub ultra folks. But I think the big thing with Golden Trail series is that once again, kind of under the Solomon empire, let's call it, like they are partnered with Quartz, and we've got some problems with Quartz. And I've had a lot of athletes reach out to me. I just released another podcast with a good friend named Finn on his single track podcast. And we talked a lot about Quartz on that. And we're getting athletes reaching back out to us about the Quartz issue. So if you are interested in understanding more about what is going on with Quartz and anti-doping in our sport, listen, I'd recommend listening to that episode with Finn. We can link it in the show notes. Also listening to our previous episode on Quartz and what's going on there, because it's going to take a lot of athlete action to stand up for our rights in the sport, to stand up against, basically what they're going to call legal doping. Basically their anti-TUE or therapeutic use exemption. So if you use an inhaler, they've got a problem with you. So reach out to us if you need to know more, if you want to know more, if you want to know how you can get involved, if you want to know how you can make an impact there, because it's going to be an issue. And they say that they're led by medical experts, but they're not following the science. They don't really know what's going on, and it's going to steer the UTMB series and a bunch of other series. And so if you're not anti-doping by not liking Quartz. Okay. So ping us, let us know if you need information. We're going to I'm personally working on putting together a letter that will go to the Pilates and UTMB series that athletes will be able to sign on to kind of voice our concern with the Quartz program. So you can reach out to us about that, and we'll let you know when we get it launched, because it's controlling our sport, and it's important that we have a voice in it.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that is, like, it's this entity that's trying to control our sport by being strictly in the gray zone. Like, they're not in black or white zone. They are in gray zone. And one of my favorite quotes from the Solomon World Series page is as follows. So it says, the Quartz event program is managed by a medical commission solely composed of doctors. This medical commission can take advice from experts of its choice and specifically give a consultative advice to the race direction on the participant's medical condition.
Yeah,
Don't know what that means.
What does that mean? What does that mean? And from talking to people like the Pilates, like they don't know what's going on. They have friends within Quartz, and they think, and Quartz says, hey, we're going to provide you with anti-doping. And so they say yes. Right. And that's not the issue, or that is an issue. So, we got to figure out what the gray zone is here and why what the rules actually are. Cause that's the problem, that rules are not clear.
Yeah, because courts is gaining momentum as races are gaining momentum and offering more prize money, and trail running is becoming more of an avenue for people to make a living off of. At the same time that courts is gaining momentum and trying to provide these guidelines in a not very scientific or succinct or black and white way. So it's very hard to have this rise in our sport to be able to make a living off it, but also have this rise in this entity that could actually completely turn off your career, right? Could completely stop your potential to earn a living off of this. So just an interesting time in our sport.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And it is for a lot of athletes, it's going to be your career on the line. And I wouldn't trust courts with your career. Is what we'll say based on the way they run their program, based on the lack of, let's say the lack of way they run their program. It's not WADA, it's not USADA. It's, a much looser program. And I wouldn't want to trust my career to them. So, we'll continue to be people who beat a drum, I think, about this, because someone has to, and I think athletes are rightfully maybe so worried that, speaking out is not in their best interest, but, I think we can do this in a very impactful manner and a very tactful manner. So, we'll continue to circle back on that topic that apparently is a very sore subject for all of us. But I think we're ready to dive into the meat and potatoes of our episode today. We've alluded to these Strava segments in our last episode. They motivate us, they scare us, they let us see where you stack up against others and also against ourselves. And so Strava took that and they turned these stories that we tell ourselves and that we tell others into this really cool series of short films. And we're kind of teasing you a little bit because they have not come out quite yet, but they're going to be released in 2 parts. You're going to be able to get them online. We'll share them on all of our feeds as they come out. But they're really cool films. We've all gotten a sneak peek at them. And they're going to inspire you and motivate you. And I watched one this morning before I went up for my bike ride, and it was great. The one that we're going to talk about today hits pretty close to home for all 3 of us. And it features our very own Hilly Goat. And I'm betting you can probably guess the topic, right? Maybe not. We're going to dive deeper today into the topic of mental health in relation to the injured athlete, right? We've all been there. We've all had our ups and downs with injury and recovery. Some of us are actively going through that right now. It's not linear always. It can be really, really hard. But this topic is so important to all of us because it involves not only your physical health and well-being that we will continue to harp on, but also your emotional health and well-being. And so we can all share here, but I'd like for the 2 of you, kind of broad strokes, like what is the first emotion that rises to the surface when you think about injury and recovery?
Oh, who wants to go first?
There's no wrong answer.
I mean, I have one, and it's the first thing that comes. It's a feeling as well as an emotion. It's this heaviness and this sadness for me personally.
Got it. Yeah, I would say mistrust is my first palpable thought, where I all of a sudden just question every single thing I've done over the past, be it half a year to a year. And I start to distrust myself right away. Like all of my trust goes out the window.
It changes your narrative, right? Mm-hmm. You've been like, I've always been, and I think Caitlin Gerben feels this way. It's like, I'm really durable. I'm so freaking durable. I can do hard things. And then to be sidelined by an injury that is the exact opposite of that makes you question your durability, makes you question the things that you want to do. And Keely, you pulled a quote from the film, Hilly's film, that we're going to talk more about today, that you guys will all get to watch very, very soon, was the quote of, I was just scratching the surface of my potential, and then it was all taken away from me. And I think we can all relate to that, right? This feeling of like immense and sudden loss in our running. Do you have anything kind of to go off of there, Hilly, at all, like about that feeling or like walking through that mentally?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I've had numerous injuries. And so, we're not just talking about like, the big accident that I've had. I think that like a lot of people have gone through, they're familiar with. Mine is just, it's kind of post that, like these other injuries that I've had kind of as a result. And every time I feel like I'm just getting back there to kind of either the status quo or, about to reach the next level. And then I got injured. And, whether it's a goal for a race, working towards a new distance, or, breaking through and being able to run these workouts again at a certain time, it felt like I was kind of on the precipice. And then it was just, it's like when the best feeling to describe it is like, like if anyone's done false summits, you reach what you think is the summit. And then you're like, oh my goodness, there's a whole other mountain range that I didn't realize is part of this trail that never ends. So.
Yeah, I think I like that. It is a false summit. You're like, gosh, darn it all. I thought we were there.
Nope. But you can also think of that false summit in a really good light too, as sometimes you don't realize your own potential, right? And like maybe for so long while you're figuring out your training, you're always at this false summit and you think it's your peak. And then as soon as you like change something up, or you get injured and you're faced to reset, you build back and you almost realize like, oh, that is actually way lower than my potential. And that feeling is so cool.
I like that. It's a new frame shift. Okay. So you're not plateauing. You're at a false summit. Okay. Okay. You
don't want to be stuck there forever either.
No, you don't want to be stuck on a plateau or a false summit forever, but maybe it's not a plateau. Maybe it's a false summit and you're about to like round the corner and it's going to be really, really cool. We're going to talk more about that and more about kind of like that aspect of patience and self-compassion here in a second, but we're going to dive into kind of the groundwork of this story. And if you're a Boulder athlete, many of you are, you're probably familiar with Green Mountain. It's a stomping ground for the local runners. It's the backyard hill. It's a place that you can come back to over and over again. Some people like to come back to it over and over and over and over and over again if you're a hilly goat. And hilly, that's where your kind of segment story started off. And it started off in one direction. You're going to use it as a super cool way to promote your book, do this big thing on it, this big kind of, what a fun way to like do a press release. And then that story suddenly veered off in another direction. So I'm wondering if you can walk us through this evolving relationship that you have with Green Mountain and where your segment story began.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I love Green Mountain just because it represents more than just a trail to me. It was kind of the very beginning of my ultra running career in many ways. It was my first taste of what mountain running, would look like going on steep trails. And it was a place that I returned to many times, hiking, throughout my recovery. It was there with me as I returned to run post accident. And it was there with me when I returned to run post ankle break. And so Green Mountain just it held this special place in my heart because I felt like it was this one trail that was always there. And as I was evolving as an athlete and healing, and again, it was, kind of how I would explore that within myself. And so again, like, as you mentioned, I was planning on Everesting Green Mountain, something that Corinne, I know you've done, and on Mount Tan, your local hill. And Keely, I'm not sure. Have you done it?
I will never do that. No, thank
you. Wise woman. But so it was something I was doing because it was when my book was launching, I felt like it was the perfect metaphor. And there's about 14 chapters in my book, and I think it's 13 laps to Everest Green Mountain. So I wanted to do a bonus lap just for, kicks, to make the whole like metaphor make sense. And as I was training for it, I was, putting in the miles, feeling healthy. But there was one run and something happened. I think I stepped on a rock, not really sure. Maybe it was a stress reaction that I didn't really know was there. But I broke my foot. And instead of Everesting on the launch date of my book, I had surgery. Literally 2 days after. So I remember walking to the store, posting a photo on, my 2 feet where I could walk. And then 2 days later, I was in a boot and I was on crutches for 5 weeks. And, Strava and I, we've had, a pretty awesome relationship. I mean, I mentioned on the last episode that I found Strava when I was recovering from my accident and, used it as kind of this positive training metric of like, oh, wow, I feel ready. And instead of, giving up on me and the project that they had, they stuck with it and they kind of took a different angle. And this is also part of, the team that was, with me for, the filming of this project. Cody Coleman, he's a filmmaker here in Boulder, and Luke Webster, he was the producer on the project. They decided that, this is a story that needs to be told, and Strava was right there, with me. And so we shifted to, what is this honest viewpoint of where these athletes have to go when they're injured and they need to recover. And, hopefully I'm not the poster child for recovery and injury. I sure hope not. But I think the whole takeaway I would like for this film, if it had one takeaway, is, you're stronger than you think you are. And even I might, be a poster child of recovering injury, but I hope I'm a poster child of resilience and like the hard work, both physically, but really mentally, that it takes to get through these hard moments in our lives.
Yeah. Green Mountain really became like a metaphor for mental as well as physical recovery, right? Like it's been with you through many, many injuries. It was a segment, I think, on Green Mountain that our coach, Adam St. Pierre, he was in charge of your Strava account. Hilly didn't actually want to see any of her Strava stuff, but Adam was tracking her Strava stuff for her. And he said, "Hey, Hilly, like you're ready. Like you're a runner again," type of thing. So it feels like there is this really cool metaphor there. And injuries aren't uncommon in our sport. All three of us have had our fair share of injuries over the past couple of years. And I'm wondering from both of you, like, how can athletes develop patience and self-compassion during their recovery process? Because that is maybe the hardest part.
Man. So, I think that's just such a hard question, especially for like your first injury, right? Because the first thing you think about when you're injured is not compassion. It's nothing resembling compassion. It's complete hatred or confusion or anger towards what you did to your body and what your body didn't do back, like what your body did and failed. And so I think compassion is something you learn over time as you do experience maybe one of those injuries, that hopefully by having this dialogue, we kind of can elicit to those who maybe aren't injured yet to have when they do become injured, because it is going to happen in your probably career as a runner at some point, small or big. But I think what it comes down to for me is that you need to have compassion to your body to actually accept that it's injured and to give it time and patience to recover. Because the biggest thing I've found in my injury history is that when I've completely disregarded my body and not given it its time to recover, is I've never gotten better. It's taken way too long. I don't recognize myself because I'm like so angry. I'm fighting my body and not accepting that it needs rest and not just to push in a different way. And so over time, I've just been able to try to give it its compassion in terms of just rest and just let it recover. Because if you just channel the energy you have frustrated towards running, towards another activity, you're not going to be able to regenerate whatever you broke running if you're hammering on any other activity just as much as you did running and keeping your body in that stress state. So that's what I've kind of been focusing on.
That acceptance, right? That acceptance becomes super, super important. Hilly, you were quoted, or you said during the film, and Keely pulled all these really great quotes out for us, just like, how am I supposed to learn to walk and run again? Like, what is like, how are you able to take that and like, and maybe it's community, maybe it's support surrounding you, maybe it's having that coach or that person. Like, how did you like have to find like patience in that process?
And exactly what Keely mentioned, it's this acceptance, because I think what I've learned over time, and every time I've gotten injured, I think it was this, the quicker I accepted it, the easier it was to kind of move through the recovery process. But for me, what really that quote I think is speaking to it, at least in the back of my mind, is this mistrust for my body. And, okay, I know an injury period is a learning opportunity for me. What isn't going right? What can I do differently? What did I do, almost to kind of get in this situation? And sometimes there's not always a clear answer, but for me, I have to learn to trust the process, kind of relinquish control, which I'm not that great at, and really lean into recovery, lean into the slower pace of life, and learn what I can to heal my body and move forward in a different direction so that, I can, avoid this happening again. But it's extremely daunting. I mean, I've had to learn how to walk and run again 3 times, and it doesn't get easier. But there's something to be learned every time from it. And it creates at first mistrust in my body, but then it creates this wonderful, trust again, once I learn kind of something new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but I think we'll dive into it right now is that idea of having to regain your confidence, like confidence in your abilities, confidence in your fitness, confidence in your training, confidence in the actual part of your body that you physically broke. I've seen Hilly go for panicked runs before. I've got all the Hilly insight. If anyone needs any, not dirt, we won't call it dirt, but if anyone needs any Hilly insight, my DMs are open. I've seen you do that, right? Like I know you in that way. And so I'm wondering, like people might be sitting here, maybe they're not injured yet. Maybe they are actively injured. Like how do we, or maybe they're at the point where they've done the run walking and now they're getting to run again. Maybe they have signed up for their first race in a long time. I'm doing my first race since February 2020 in March. And that is both awesome and terrifying. And it's like, I have to trust my body to do this thing. Like, do you just give in? Like, how do we say all of a sudden, like, okay, I have this confidence again that my body isn't going to fail me?
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be really hard when it's your first injury, right? Because I didn't have a roadmap. I had no idea what to do. It had never happened to me before. And so I hope that, with what Strava created with this film of mine personally, but also, these other films that they're bringing out I'll speak to mine though, is that there is some sort of hope. You have people to learn from. And that was my hope all along by sharing this story that, it's not straightforward. It's not quote unquote pretty, right? It can get pretty ugly, but even embracing that side, I think you can learn from it. And I didn't do it perfectly. Like, how Corinne mentioned that I would go for these panic runs because I felt like I lost time. I felt like I was, starting, miles back from the rest of the pack, and I had to catch up. But maybe I learned the hard way that doesn't work. It led to, maybe, setbacks in my recovery. And so embracing that kind of imperfection, but like learning from others and following along almost in their guidance, not necessarily their footsteps, because each person's path is their own, but embracing that uncertainty and still moving forward and, being confident that your body knows what to do if you're just willing to listen to it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I absolutely. This is making me think really long and hard about a question that my physical therapist posed to the group the other day. He said, what is the hardest part of the recovery process for you? And he gave examples like, building back strength, doing the hard work, but he also kind of let us like noodle it. And I think you're nailing it on the head, right? Like for me, the hardest part of the injury process is never like pushing through a workout or pushing through a cycling, like arm cycling bout or whatever it is that you're trying to do to gain back that fitness. It's actually trusting that your body is going to get better and that you're going to be able to get back and like to allow the process to happen. So it's almost like it's more of a mental journey for me than a physical journey, because I think a lot of us listening probably can resonate to the fact that we are very good at doing hard things and doing very painful things. And most of the time, that's not the most important part of the recovery journey. It's the mental side to really just gain that trust back.
Yeah, I feel like we've all probably had this experience. I remember having this experience in high school. So as a freshman in high school, sophomore in high school, I don't remember. I avulsed the growth plate off my hip. So I like basically tore the growth plate off my hip, running cross country. Just a great start to things. But essentially, like I remember like basically every fall I would have this like hip pain. And there was a while of me having to be like, is this real pain or is this anxiety? Like, is this like, does my hip actually hurt? Or is it like, I'm back in the same place. I'm doing the same workouts. I'm running. Like, I think all of us have had that experience coming back from injury where you're like, is this good pain or bad pain? And that's not always easy. Right. And putting together guidelines for yourself of like, okay, if it's above this on the scale, if it's above a 4, it's bad pain. Or if it feels this specific way, or if it lingers for this long, it's bad pain. And deciding with your physical therapist or with your orthopedic specialist, whoever it might be, what those guidelines are can help you, I think, weed through some of that, because that's so hard. Mm-hmm. Like I'm going to struggle with that for sure. When I run way too cool in March, it's like, oh, is this normal? Like, is this the normal 50K pain, or is this, I broke my pelvis a year ago pain? Like that's going to be really hard to wade through. And part of it's going to, a huge part of it's going to be psychological.
Mm-hmm. And it's so important to recognize that. And that was something I've had to work through a lot of times, and we talked about this with UTMB when I had to pull out and I dropped out. When we were talking about it, there was definitely a physical pain and I knew I did something wrong, but there's also that huge psychological pain. And as soon as I felt that, it was just like, I don't want to do this again. I can't go through this again. And it's almost that, preservation, right? And it's really hard to be able to figure out what is actually true pain, or what's kind of that, I think, that reminiscent pain from like how I described it when the first emotion that comes to me when I think about injury is sadness. So, and I think that's also why it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And it's something that I think is so important personally, but as well as just, professionally, is mental health and the psychological aspect of what athletes have to go through. I mean, we pour our heart and soul into this sport. I think anyone does. It's not just professional athletes. And, that's not just physical work. It's a lot of mental and emotional work. And so we need to take care of ourselves from that aspect. And there is a mourning period when, injuries happen. And I think for me as well, like Keely mentioned, that's the hardest part to be able to work through.
Yeah. It's like, we're mostly giving you things to ruminate here about. We're not giving you any answers, but I think that's important, is that you're all on your own journey. And I think that comparison trap that we talked about last time, right? Like comparison, I think is it a Teddy Roosevelt quote that says comparison is the thief of joy. But like, it's that self-comparison. It's that comparison to other people's recovery. It's like, I think I had 3 friends all break an ankle in like a month-long span, and everyone had a different recovery trajectory. I think it was like Dylan had his ankle issue. Maybe Hill, you might've had an ankle and Keely. And then my friend Sarah Kai's, like everyone broke their ankle in the same time period. But, every break's a little different. Every body's a little different. Every recovery process is a little different. And the amount of time that each person had to take off was vastly different. Right. And so it's so easy to get caught up in like, oh, well, if you do this, this is how you come back from it.
Yeah. And another piece too is like, I actually emailed Keely not too long ago about, it's like an ankle routine, right? Because, with my ankle that I broke and then my foot that I broke, I've noticed that there's just differences in how I have to take care of my body to train. Right. We've talked about, I don't train like the typical ultra runner, right? I don't really think anyone has, a typical training, but it's also the mental part, like running on the ice this week. I felt stressed.
How psychologically hard was that?
Yes, it's incredibly hard. I felt like my body tense, and it's taken me years to work through that. And I literally have to tell myself, like, breathe, Hillary, like relax, like try, like focus on an even stride. Like I try to like have the yoga voice of like deep breath, like meditation, I try, I seriously
saying yoga words, meditation, Shavasana, warrior 1, Hillary.
Downward dog. Yeah, seriously. I was like saying it to myself because I was trying to relax myself, because if I'm tense, then that changes my gait and that could lead to, another fall. But it's taken me years and I have to practice it. But that doesn't mean that those feelings just go away. I mean, I have those fears. I mean, when I did TDS after my ankle break in 2019, I ran the whole race with poles on the uphill and on the downhill, because it helped me kind of create more confidence. And I felt like if I had a little trip up, I could stabilize myself with the poles. And then now, as I've gotten more confident with it, downhill running or just running in general, and mobility in my ankles, it's gotten better, but it's not something that I can just forget about or, just assume that's not there from a psychological kind of trauma. So.
Yeah, I think this is a little shift for us. And this is kind of like one of the last like big questions I have on this. And it's something that you pointed out. And I think it's a conversation that we've had as a group a bunch, and it has to go to like our identity as a runner and that feeling of loss of identity and self-worth. And so you mentioned this in the video, but to be completely honest and transparent with everyone, like I was also on the receiving end of many calls and texts with Hilly during the injury this spring. I had been in Boulder right before it happened. We went for a triple on the mountain. Like this is literally a week before I found out that I was super injured. So we just had a great time. And like you need that person in your corner that's going to talk you off the ledge a little bit. And that can be your coach. That can be a good friend. And it was so apparent in these texts and in these calls that like you were rocked emotionally, right? Like everything had been ripped away. Like you were facing another recovery, another learn to run, another, like, how long is this going to take? Like, is it worth it type of sensation, right? And that's a very potent, real sensation. So how can people think about their identity as a runner and their identity feeling like they're losing it with injury, right? And maybe it's because too much of their identity is wrapped up in it. Like how have each of you dealt with that when it comes to these injuries that really limit your ability to run for a long period of time?
Oh man. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'd say I agree with you, as it's not been an easy journey. I would say when I first used to get injured, it would turn into it would manifest into all of my being. So all of a sudden I felt like a really shitty friend, a really bad partner, really bad at my job, bad at everything. And it was all because I had my self-identity tied into how I worked out or how I was running as an athlete. And when I wasn't running as being a healthy athlete, I translated that to how I was being as a human. And it ended up being really negative, because then it was kind of just this downward spiral where I felt like I couldn't do anything correctly and that I was bad at everything. And I think it really took getting injured more than once to like reevaluate my self-worth. And I don't want this to have to be anybody else's experience. And I don't think it should have to be, but I think talking about it will help, is that we aren't defined by how we run, right? Like at the end of the day, we're defined by like who we are as a person and like what we bring to the table with our friendships, our relationships, and our like happiness and joy in the world. And I feel like we can build this web of like relationships and accomplishments and things you really are passionate about. And we can get that all tied up in our lives. And that can encompass running, and running can be a part of it, but it should be something that like, when its time comes, you can cut it off that web and like leave it by itself and like be a very functional human being without it. And obviously that takes a long time to build up. But if you prioritize just like living your life to increase your happiness and like fill yourself with joy through other things outside of running, it will help when that one thing is taken away. You'll be able to fill it with a lot of other things. And yeah, a lot easier said than done. I'm still not mastered it completely, but I will say like trying to put that together so that you have a bigger web of things that like make up your life and make up your identity and make you happy is really key.
Yeah. Different rocks that are your foundation, as opposed to running being your only foundation. Hilly, what did you find kind of through that process of like removing your identity and self-worth from this one thing?
Yeah, it's like Keely said, I'm definitely not perfect at it. And for me, it's really important. Like I definitely relied on you, Corinne, and, my coach, Adam, and, my friends here, my really good friend, Elise, she was here with me.
She's a hardo. And what I mean by that is that she tells you exactly how it is. I love Elise. We can give her all the shout outs.
I was just so thankful for her because, she, and with that, like, she's a hardo. She tells it exactly like it is. And she wasn't going to let me kind of fall into this abyss that maybe I felt like I was. And at the end of the day, I wasn't going to let myself do it either, but I was feeling it really hard and, almost harder than I had ever felt it before. And I think it was because I was, using running it's a huge source of joy for me, but it created this point where I had to turn inward, and I had almost, it's like this teeter-totter, like the balance had shifted. And so there was a lot of, as athletes, we have to put a lot of effort into training and the physical act of running, but that's not everything. And if it gets too imbalanced, especially for me, that's where I can become unhappy. And for that, I had to turn inward and almost rediscover that I was made of other things. And the huge irony of it all was that I was celebrating a book launch and
like about injury, about being strong and like all that kind of stuff.
And I had this other thing, these other passions in life. And so it was great. I mean, it was serendipitous because I could, really focus on that and really lean into it. But I mean, this sounds strange, but I had to reread portions of the book because I had forgotten that I had gone through that and that I had the strength to do it again. And the whole reason why I wrote the book was to challenge other people and challenge them and show them like, look, you can be resilient too. You can be strong too. And I had the opportunity to learn it again. And like Keely mentioned, I think it's a huge point for me and a huge reminder to take that balance with me every day, not just when I'm injured. And so feeding these other portions of myself that make me a whole human instead of just getting joy and accomplishment from running or racing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had this interesting realization like Monday. And this is going back to the fact that like I had this weird health scare over the weekend. So right when Haley got hurt this spring, I also discovered that I had a massive injury and was looking at least 6 weeks off of no running altogether, at least, and then kind of building from there. And oddly enough, it was the calmest I've ever been about an injury in my entire life. I was like almost excited. Like, I think I was probably ready for a break in a lot of ways. And I didn't really know that because like that was the easiest 6 weeks I've ever taken off. Like was honestly and weirdly, and maybe in hindsight, totally fine. I've got a long history with overtraining and some other stuff. And I think that has like protected that psyche for me that Haley's talked about before. Like I have these other things that I'm really passionate about that I can pull my energy into. Also having a dog, super helpful. Totally just recommend getting a dog. But with this health scare over the weekend, my face was super swollen and I couldn't run or ride or do anything comfortably really. And that was way harder. Like I took 3 days off of training and that was hard, and that was very different than the 6 weeks before I could even start walking again that I had last year. And it was this thing of like, oh, it's because I think when you're primed, when you're really, really primed for something and you're building and you have momentum, getting rocked, I think like can hit a little harder. And just like having that moment of reflection of like, okay, where are my eggs and what baskets are they in? And what am I investing my time and my energy into that I need to feed forward? Because this is a good reminder. So hopefully you all don't have to have reminders and we can be your reminder for you. And I coached junior skiing for a long time. And this was a conversation I had with 11-year-olds. So if we can have this conversation with 11-year-olds, we can have it with all of you too. And they'd be super nervous before a race. And I'd say, hey, like, and so this is not just about like getting to exercise, but getting to race and getting to perform. They'd be super nervous. And I'd be like, okay, look, like, are your parents still going to love you independent of how today goes? And they'd be like, well, yeah. And I'd be like, okay, like, are your siblings still going to love you independent of if you're good or bad today? Well, yeah. And I was like, am I still going to care about you? Like independent of if you do good or bad? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, okay, then like, what are we worried about? Because like, no matter the outcome, like, your parents love you, your siblings love you, your team loves you, like I love you, like why, like, like trying to take that mentality and that mindset into running, into your identity with running and exercise and into sports performance, I think can be a lesson that we try to instill in our like general psyche because it's so much easier to race when you're not worried about your self-value and your self-worth being reflected in these results. So
totally. What you just said, Corinne, gave me chills. Like when I broke my pelvis, I had never been as relieved as I was when it was broken. And I needed that time off so badly, but I was denying it for myself because I had all of these like ambitions of like what I should be doing next and what was next and what was next. And I was never listening and I was never taking time off. And I needed that time so badly. And it was like the best time for an injury I could have ever asked for, even though it was obviously awful.
Yeah. And it's like hindsight, right? Teaches us a lot. And we're not telling you to go break your pelvis or your ankle or your foot or anything like that, or get some sort of weird allergic reaction and get a shot of epi. But there are things that you can do to kind of set yourself up for just success in career, in in running, in life in general, right? That feels, that you're grounded in values. And I've had a lot of conversations recently with people in our mental, let's call it performance sports sphere, Addie Bracy, Neil Palace, Justin Ross, these people who are very, very, very brilliant when it comes to sports psych. I'm actually, for those watching, although it's blurry, we'll see if it'll focus. Nope, it's too smart. There we go. This is Addie Bracy's book, Mental Training for Ultra Running, a psychological skills guidebook for ultra success. And I want to get 30 copies and send it to all my athletes. Because I think working through something like that, which gives you these really tangible skills, like what are your values? And values are different than goals, right? Like what's going to ground you when your goals go out the window? Your values. Or what are you going to do when you have to cope with adversity? Or how are you going to emotionally bounce back from a physical setback? Like there are skills that are beyond the scope of our expertise, but by utilizing people like Addie Bracy and their specific skill set, like I think that's great homework. And you might find that some of it's really challenging. Like, what is my why? I don't know. Sometimes it changes, but spending time doing that. I know Hilly loves writing, like spending time making a practice of like evaluating your values, your goals, your whys, how are you going to cope in a situation like that, I think is what sets people up for success over than just like hoping that when you do ultimately, break your ankle that you're okay. Right. Like, have you guys found anything specific? And maybe it's just experience and all of us having gone through it very, very personally. What are other things that people can do to try to set themselves up for if and when they have that big failure at work or in running or in their physical well-being?
Yeah. So I love that book also that Addie wrote. I also have a copy here. And one thing that I think it's great to read these things, right? But then it can seem like, oh man, like I have to, at least for me, do the homework, right? But that's a good thing. Instead of having it be like a negative, like, oh, I'm so bad at these things, like practice it and start really small. You know how I mentioned, like literally when I was saying this, like Shavasana or like some random stuff on the trail, like actually practicing it. Because I think what goes on between our ears is so important. And if I know I can personally go into kind of when I'm stressed, like this spiraling of negativity and, thinking like, oh my gosh, like, cause I'm scared because I don't want to get injured again. But instead of that, trying to reframe it and starting small. And I think it starts with recognizing if you have negative thoughts or kind of these negative tendencies, right? And switching them into a positive. And then using that also, I think, as a springboard. Addie talks about this in her book. Problems are going to happen in a race, in training. Corinne, recovery is not linear. This. Keely, this too. And being a true scientist, which we all are, and problem solving our way through it to kind of work through the obstacle instead of seeing it as a complete block. Mm-hmm. And I think, taking that into daily life is a huge step forward.
Oh yeah, that's a really good idea.
And like I said, you can still have a melty. You can still, if you need to go sit on a rock and have a melty, that's totally okay.
Melty.
Yeah. Melties are, we try to avoid them in certain contexts. And sometimes it's because you just need a snack, but sometimes you really need to have a melty. And that might just mean going for a run and sitting on a rock in the sun and grounding yourself and talking in your yoga voice or whatever voice you need to talk in. And like, just feeling it for a hot second. Like you don't have to, we're not going to pretend that it's easy or pretend that we're perfect or pretend that, you don't have to, that you can feel it all without it being derailing. But I think it's,
totally.
You got to practice those things.
Yeah. And I think like being present really helps with your ability to like think about and live with other things. Because in my mind, when I was really unhealthy with all my running habits, like every single thing I did in the day was around something related to running or performance. And I couldn't dissociate the two. So I wasn't able to be present when I was with my friends. I wasn't present with work because I was always fixated on these things. And so I think just getting in the like practice of trying to be present in whatever thing you're doing and then leaving them behind. So like being really present in your run and then packaging it up and putting it away for a little bit because like you were there and you did it and you did great. And then it can be put away so that you can focus that energy somewhere else that also can bring you joy, and you can be more present and make better connections with people that you're around because you're all in and you're present there. And that's something that like I've definitely been working on, and I think could really, really help in cases of setback or injury, or just time when you want to take off from running.
Yeah. And I think kind of the best way to sum that up before we dive into our Society Slam for today is, I think Keely, you pulled a Alexi Pappas book quote, and it says, "We constantly go through life trying to prove our personal laws to be true. We create laws based off prior experiences so that when we encounter scenarios that are vaguely similar in the future, your brain reacts with irrational intensity. It governs everything: physiology, psychology, health. You need to be able to change your personal laws by making a conscious choice to be something else, something new. You have to make these conscious choices so often that they become part of you." And I think that's, we all got some chills. Those are like, that's psychological flexibility right there. And I think that is a great kind of way to sum up, that need to feel it, to see it, to adjust to it, and to allow yourself space to change to those scenarios so that you're not just this irrational intensity of reaction. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's, her book title is, like bravery. And I think that it's like being brave enough and having the courage to do exactly what Alexis is like talking about. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexi. We're just going to use all your words from here on out and seem really philosophical and deep, but we're going to round out today with our Society Slam. And again, Society Slam is brought to you by our good friends over at Oura Ring. We've all got our Oura Rings that we've been running around in now for a couple months that are pretty cool. Keely, I know that you have been kind of looking at some features recently in it, and I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about some of the stuff that you've been digging into.
Yeah. So Oura Ring tracks body temperature, and it also tracks your heart rate overnight and your heart rate variability while you're sleeping. And so it gives you like an overall heart rate variability score, a sleep score, and it kind of looks at your body temperature fluctuations over the course of your sleep cycle. So it gives you a rating for each night. And what was really cool this past week was that my menstrual cycle was coming and my heart rate variability was going down. My heart rate average overnight was going up and my body temperature was elevated. And so all of a sudden, my Oura Ring kept telling me that my sleep was a little bit impaired and that I was sleeping less. My body temperature was elevated. And you could see this trend, right, going up over time. And it was just really cool to witness. And it was, my period actually came like a day late this month than normal. I know a day late's not really anything, but mine's pretty good lately. But I could see that it actually was completely reflected in the trends of the body temperature over time, where it started increasing and then it tapered off about 2 days before I got my cycle. And it asked me like, did you get your cycle today? Basically 2 days before I got it and the day I got it. And I clicked yes. And so it'll continue to learn about my body and my physiological parameters and how they change before and after my cycle, and hopefully get even more accurate in the future. But I thought that was super cool because I was like, why am I so like feeling a little more tired? And then you just kind of look at these trends in the data and it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it'll be cool to track over time. There's a lot of, as we all know, there's a lot of individual variability, both like between all of us, right? Like we're all gonna be very different as far as how our cycles impact all that, but also like even cycle to cycle. So it'll be cool to see kind of what that looks like moving forward. But I think a cool thing to touch on here, which I think is a really prevalent Society Slam, was kind of talking about that heart rate stuff. And in part, you posed this question after our last podcast about, like how, well, I'm just dropping shit over here. How do you convince people that other forms of training, like cross training, being on the bike, whatever it might be, is training? And what does that look like? And you got some responses from people over social media, both on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm wondering if you can share kind of some of those thoughts and insights.
Sure. Yeah. I think the general consensus was a lot of people were recommending heart rate, which obviously we are no stranger to. Heart rate is a very valuable tool for training. However, I think we all know that heart rate is also something that is not tracked in trail running by many athletes. And so therefore it's not a great metric because we don't get it. And if we do, it's by a heart rate monitor on the wrist that is typically relatively inaccurate during running. But I also got a lot of other really cool thoughts, and it was a lot around like power. So obviously on cycling, you can calculate power from wattage based off of how long you held that wattage for, right? There's not something that's quite as direct for running. And so a lot of people were just like throwing out things around running, how to take into account elevation gain in relation to RPE or rated of perceived exertion, and then like time at different intensities. And so I think the general consensus is like, we still don't know 100%, right? Like, is everything you'll encounter in a trail race reflected in your heart rate data? I don't know if we can say that 100% would be true. But I do think that like, if we can start getting maybe more trail runners to wear heart rate monitors and start actually monitoring the strain that the training is having on them, that could be a good step in the right direction to start quantifying like how a trail run impacts them versus a mountain bike ride versus like a road ride versus a ski, and like really start to understand how all of these things are impacting training load and how they could impact fitness and recovery.
Yeah. And I would say what we say about impact there is, and you're not saying like necessarily like it's trying to quantify training load in trail runners. And there's no, because we don't use, you don't see a ton of trail runners running around with chest straps, right? That's much more of a cycling and a Nordic skiing and that kind of, and triathlon, that community. It's not so much a running community thing. But I do think that there'd be value in that as far as like understanding time at intensity in that population. And that like I personally, when I knew I was going to spend a ton of time on the bike this past year, although I don't have a bike computer, so I'm not doing power. I do have a chest strap. And so now like I wear it, I don't run in it all the time, but I do always wear it on the bike because I wore a chest heart rate strap for over a decade as a Nordic skier. So I have a fairly decent sense of what's going on, but like for me, it was a way to regulate my intensity on the bike, both to get intensity in when I needed to do a workout on the bike, to know that I was going hard enough. And also to like, be like, okay, I thought that was an easy endurance ride, but I kind of went hard type of thing because it's a less familiar modality for me than going out for a trail run, let's say. So I think that there is value in figuring out how to quantify training load, particularly as athletes potentially do more multi-sport stuff, either due to weather or injury or seasons, could be super, super valuable.
Yeah. And I was just on a run this morning and we were talking about just trail running in general and how I think heart rate would be really advantageous for a lot of runners, because we might finish a trail run and be like, okay, that was an RP of a 6 out of 10, right? But during that run, if it was hilly, you have a lot of time where that RP is higher than 6, most likely, even if you do slow down. And then there's probably a lot of time where it might be lower than 6 if you're just running an easy downhill, whereas the whole average run might be a 6. There were lots of times throughout were different. Which is not quite the same if you're running on a road and doing a set pace. That RP is staying relatively constant. And so it'd be really cool to look at like, okay, how much time were you at an RP above 6 and how much time were you below there? And how does that impact like total cumulative load of the training? And how does that impact how many calories were burned and how much food you need to be eating during these sessions and all of these things? And it's just this rabbit hole and I absolutely love it. But
yeah. So if you're using things like Training Peaks or Strava though, and you can do like, we can set, say both those use like a normalized graded pace or a grade adjusted pace, in which, basically it says on this uphill, if you were running on a flat surface, this is the approximate pace it would be, which doesn't necessarily work if the terrain underfoot is super technical, but if it's a consistent grade or if it's undulating grade, you can get more information from that. And so that, like, I do that all the time with my runners. If they, particularly on long runs, particularly if they're hilly long runs, I'll go in and I'll look at every single climb and I'll say, okay, like, nope, it was all endurance paced. Okay, perfect. Or I can go and I'll highlight it. And particularly my athletes who like go for the SFRC run in the headlands on the weekend, it's like, oh, we actually got some threshold in, we actually got 20 to 30 minutes of threshold work in because all these uphills were at a normalized graded pace, equivalent to lactate threshold. So there are tools out there that you can use that are pace derived, because in part, like they've been derived because we're not using heart rate and corresponding heart rates at that zone. So there's lots of work to be done. And I hope that more researchers will take some of these questions on so that we can get a better understanding of what we're looking at there. Haley, did you get any interesting Society Slam material from the audience this past week?
Well, I did, not related to all of this training, this training load talk. Of course, there were just some people that really liked the episode. But something that I wanted to add to was that with heart rate variability, right? It's another piece that can incorporate kind of like the life stress, right? If your heart rate is elevated. And then again, it could be useful to have a heart rate strap when you're running to see that, okay, like, well, actually this recovery run was more like an endurance pace because I was feeling maybe a little bit stressed. I didn't sleep well. This is another thing that we can kind of use to track. But I think you need to have both, right, to get more accurate levels. But that was just kind of something that I was thinking about. But I did get this really cool Society Slam if it's applicable to share.
Share everything.
Say share it.
Mine's going to be super weird. So you're good.
Okay. Well, okay. So I'm just going to read the whole thing. And this is so funny. I got a message from someone I went to high school with. I haven't seen her for like 10 years. And she messaged me and she said, I was listening to Trail Society and the conversation about how to get more women in ultras. I think dispelling some myths about who ultra runners are would be awesome. You don't have to be young, thin, and the most fit person ever. Focus on mental toughness and how it's okay to be a mid to the back of the pack runner. I just love what you all are doing on Trail Society. It's helped me to get past these barriers and just get outside and enjoy it. She says she's a psychologist, and for me, the long days are proving that I can do hard things, even though I've never been a quote unquote athlete. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm loving all the conversations. You all three are inspiring.
Okay, our job's done.
Done. Don't have to record another podcast ever again. That's awesome.
That's amazing.
Mine is I'm going to harken back to our owl topic one more time. There are two things.
Never going away.
My in-laws wanted us to know that there's a time of the year too where owls also do this thing called branching, in which they are learning to fly. And so they will like coast out of a tree onto the trail. And then they will literally use their beaks and talons to like climb back up the tree. And that could be some of that, which I think is like insane. But
I would cry if I witnessed that.
But the other piece of the puzzle was, and they also were like, oh, we need to get headbands with eyes on the back. That's how you deter owls. But in that vein, really good friend, Schemo phenomenon, amazing artist, Nikki LaRochelle, who's made really cute buffs and stuff in the past. She was like, if you guys need a Trail Society buff with an owl face, some eyes or something on the back, we could make this happen. So I think that we might need to get some animal deterrent buffs that are super adorable, but also very practical made with Nikki. So if you're interested in getting a Trail Society themed bird deterrent buff, we'll work with our artist friend to make that happen, which I think would be the funniest and most amazing, merch that we could ever put out.
I love it.
Okay. That's all I got. Anyone got anything else? No, nope. That's it. Okay. Well, as per usual, then slide into our DMs. Okay. Send us your race results. Aravaipa's constantly got racing going on, so we're keeping an eye on you, Aravaipa. Y'all are running fast out in the Arizona desert. Additionally, if you've got topic ideas, we've got the Strava segment theme going on. We're going to do some women's health stuff, I think, after that. But if there's anything that you want us to talk about, slide into our DMs. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, how we can help make the sport a better place for everyone involved. And until next time, we'll see you on the trails.